Hello boys and girls, I am Mrs. Y. Perumal and the topic for today's genetics lesson is incomplete dominance and codominance. The aims for today's lessons are as follows. Number 1, explanation of incomplete dominance using an example. Number 2, explanation of codominance using an example. Number 3, comparison of complete dominance, incomplete dominance and codominance. Number 4, how to do a monohybrid cross for incomplete and codominance. Number 5, typical genotypic and phenotypic ratios for monohybrid crosses involving all three types of dominance. And number 6, examples of genetic crosses involving incomplete and codominance. Explanation of incomplete dominance. Definition of incomplete dominance: no one allele is dominant over the other. Number 2, when an organism is heterozygous for a trait, it will show a third or new phenotype. This new phenotype is called an intermediate phenotype because it is a blend of the first two phenotypes. For example, in the plant species shown to the right, when a red flowering plant is crossed with a yellow flowering plant, a heterozygous orange flowering plant is produced. Orange flower color is an intermediate phenotype of red and yellow flower colors, since orange is a blend of red and yellow colors. For both incomplete and codominance, an organism with the original phenotype will always be homozygous. In this example, the red flowering plant will always have two identical alleles for red flower color, and the yellow flowering plant will always have two identical alleles for yellow flower color. Explanation of codominance. The definition for codominance: both alleles are equally dominant. Therefore, both alleles of a hybrid or heterozygote will be expressed in the phenotype. This results in a combination of the phenotypes of both parents in the hybrid. In the diagram to the right, a red cow is mated with a white bull to produce a calf with a red coat interspersed with patches of white hair. Remember, both parents will always be homozygous for coat color. This combination of the two different colors is referred to as roan in animals. Why is this an example of codominance? Because the alleles for red color and white color are both expressed in the calf's coat. I'm now going to do a comparison of complete dominance, incomplete dominance and codominance with respect to definition, how to represent their alleles, the genotype and phenotype of their respective hybrids, the rest of their genotypes and their respective phenotypes. The definition of each type of dominance. Complete dominance: one allele is dominant over the other. The other allele is recessive. Incomplete dominance: no one allele is dominant over the other. For codominance, both alleles are equally dominant. How to represent the alleles? For this example or comparison, I am still going to use red flower color and white flower color. For complete dominance, a capital letter R to represent the allele for red flower color and lowercase r to represent the allele for the recessive flower color, which is white flower color. So it's the same letter, but a capital letter for the dominant characteristic and a lowercase of the same letter for the recessive characteristic. For incomplete dominance, since no one allele is dominant over the other, we use two different letters and both are capital letters. Capital letter R for the red flower color and capital letter W to represent the allele causing white flower color. And the same with codominance. Since both alleles are equally dominant, we will also use both capital letters to represent the alleles for each flower color. Capital R for red flower color and capital W for white flower color. The genotype and phenotype of the hybrids. For complete dominance, two different alleles make the hybrids. For complete dominance is a capital letter to represent the dominant allele and a lowercase r to represent the recessive allele. However, for incomplete dominance and codominance, we represent the hybrid in exactly the same way. A combination of two different letters, capital R and capital W, capital R and capital W. However, the phenotypes for each hybrid is different. For complete dominance, it is the dominant characteristic which shows up in the hybrid. For incomplete dominance, since no one allele is dominant over the other, an intermediate trait, in this case, intermediate for red and white is pink, is seen in the hybrid phenotype. And the phenotype for this hybrid, for codominance, since both alleles are equally dominant, therefore both alleles are expressed, so this flower would be partly red and partly white. The genotypes and phenotypes for each type of dominance. For complete dominance, it's two small letter r's for which is homozygous recessive for white flower color, the recessive color. Homozygous dominant, two capital letter r's for the red flower color, and the hybrid, capital letter and a small letter r for the red flower color. So three different genotypes for complete dominance, however only two phenotypes, white and red, for complete dominance. For incomplete dominance and codominance, the genotypes are exactly the same, and there are three genotypes. Capital W and capital W, remember the original phenotypes are always have a homozygous genotype. So white, the genotype would be two capital W's. For red, the genotype will be homozygous with two capital R's. Exactly the same for codominance. The white phenotype would be represented with two capital W's, and the alleles for the red phenotype, the alleles would be two capital R's. The same with the genotype of the hybrid. Capital R and capital W, capital R and capital W for both incomplete and codominance. However, the phenotype of the hybrid for incomplete dominance is an intermediate color of these two. Intermediate for red and white is pink. And the phenotype for this hybrid would be a combination of white and red. Therefore, this phenotype would be partly red and partly white. Now I'm going to do a monohybrid cross for incomplete dominance and codominance by crossing a plant with the original phenotype, example red flower color, with another plant with the original phenotype, example white flower color. Remember that the parents with the original phenotypes will always be homozygous for that particular characteristic. In this case, we are using the key capital letter R to represent the allele for red flower color and capital letter W for the allele causing white flower color. So let's start with incomplete dominance, going down this way. P1 phenotype, red flower color times white flower color. Genotype, remember the original phenotype has to be homozygous, so two capital letter R's for the red flower color times the white parent. The parent with white flowers will have two capital W's for white flower color. And then meiosis, broken line, gametes, this allele goes into that gamete and this allele goes into that gamete for this parent, and the gametes are separated with the cross, and for this parent the same, this allele goes into that gamete and this allele goes into that gamete. Since the gametes for flower color are identical for each parent, these two gametes for this parent are identical and these two gametes for this parent are identical, then we can use a simple line diagram to show fertilization. Because if any one of these gametes of this parent were to fuse with any one of these gametes for the other parent, we would always get a genotype for the F1 all being heterozygous, capital R, capital W. If you are not comfortable with this, you can still do the Punnett square. You would still get the same answer for F1 genotype or hybrid, capital R, capital W. Phenotype, because this is incomplete dominance, therefore an intermediate phenotype of pink flowers would be seen. This is an intermediate phenotype. Pink is an intermediate phenotype of red and white colors, since no one allele is dominant over the other. Now I'm going to do the monohybrid cross for codominance. Same key, capital R for red flower, capital W for white flower. P1 phenotype, red flower times white flower. Genotype, remember the original phenotypes would always have a homozygous genotype. So 2 capital R's for red flower and 2 capital W's for white flower. Meiosis, gametes, exactly the same as for incomplete dominance, and fertilization will result in the F1 genotype all being hybrid, capital R, capital W. The phenotype, however, is different because both these alleles are equally dominant. Therefore, both alleles would be expressed in the phenotype. Therefore, this flower would be partly red and partly white. Partly red and partly white, since both alleles are equally dominant. Thus, both alleles are expressed in the phenotype. Monohybrid cross rules for complete dominance, incomplete dominance, and codominance. I am now going to teach you typical genotypic and phenotypic ratios for 3 crosses for complete dominance, incomplete dominance, and codominance. The alleles would be the same as I've discussed before for red flower color and white flower color, capital R for red flower color, incomplete dominance, and lowercase r for white flower color, the recessive condition, for complete dominance. For incomplete dominance and codominance, capital R for red flower color and capital W for white flower color. So the first cross is pure breed times pure breed, or a homozygous parent times a homozygous parent. For all 3 types of dominance, complete dominance, incomplete dominance, and codominance, whenever a pure breed is crossed with a pure breed, the genotype of the F1 would always be a hybrid. The hybrid for the genotype for the hybrid for complete dominance would be a capital letter and a lowercase, and the hybrid for incomplete dominance and codominance would be a combination of the 2 alleles, capital R, capital W, and the same for codominance. The phenotype, as I have discussed already, this would be the dominant characteristic, red. Here it would be the intermediate characteristic for incomplete dominance, and here a combination of both characteristics, red and white, partly red and partly white. The second cross is when a hybrid is crossed with a hybrid for all 3 types of dominance. The genotypic ratio and the phenotypic ratio would always be 1:2:1. For the phenotypic ratios as well, 1:2:1. However, the exception is for complete dominance. For the phenotypic ratio, it would always be 3 dominant trait is to 1 recessive trait. And let's look in detail at the genotypic ratios. The one for complete dominance, the one is homozygous dominant and the other one is homozygous recessive. The two in the middle are heterozygous. And the phenotypic ratio is 3 red to 1 white. For incomplete dominance, the one is homozygous for the original characteristic. The other one is also homozygous for the original phenotype. And the two in the middle are the hybrids for the intermediate phenotype. And exactly the same here. One is the original for red, the other one is the original for white, and the two would be the new phenotype, which is partly red and partly white. The third cross is when a pure breed is crossed with a hybrid. The genotypic ratio as well as the phenotypic ratio will always be 1:1. For the F1, 1:1, 1:1. And the genotypes and the phenotypes of the F1 would be the same as the parents. Here, genotype is 2 small r's, genotype of the F1 is 2 small r's. Genotype of the P1 is 2 capital R's, genotype of the F1 is 2 capital R's. The phenotype of the P1 is pink, the phenotype is pink. Exception to the third rule, pure breed times hybrid. Remember the third rule, pure breed times hybrid gives a genotypic ratio and phenotypic ratio of 1:1 in the F1 for complete dominance, incomplete dominance and codominance. The exception is for complete dominance when the pure breed parent is homozygous dominant. In this case, the genotypic ratio will still be 1 homozygous dominant to 1 heterozygous. However, the phenotype of the F1 would be 100% having the dominant trait. It is important to learn these genotypic and phenotypic ratios for these crosses because sometimes in exam questions you would be given these ratios for the offspring F1 or F2 and you may be required to determine the genotypes and phenotypes of their respective parents. Secondly, when doing a genetic cross, you would be able to predict the phenotypic and genotypic ratios in your answer. Now I'm going to do examples of monohybrid crosses for incomplete dominance and codominance. Number 1. When a red cow and a white bull were mated, the calves, F1 calves, had coats with patches of red and patches of white. The first question is, name the type of dominance. So you have to look at the calf, the offspring, to see its phenotype to get your clue. When you look at the calf's coat, it had patches of red and patches of white. This is a combination of the red coat of the one parent and the white coat color of the other parent. So because it's a combination, both phenotypes are expressed. It means that both alleles for red coat color and white coat color have been expressed. So both alleles are equally dominant, therefore it is codominance. The next question, do a genetic cross to show the genotype and phenotype of the F1. So the calf is F1 and you got to cross the parents to show the genotype and the phenotype of the F1 calves. Key, capital R for red coat and capital W for white coat. P1 phenotype, red coat times white coat. Genotype, remember these are original phenotypes, therefore they would be, the genotype would be homozygous, 2 capital R's for red coat and 2 capital W's for white coat. Meiosis, gametes, one type of gamete, this allele goes there, this allele goes there, and for this parent, this allele goes there, this allele goes there. So same identical type of gametes for this parent and identical type of gametes for this parent with respect to coat color. Therefore, we can use a line diagram and you will get for fertilization, and the F1 genotype would all be capital R, capital W, in other words hybrid. And the phenotype, because this is co-dominance, then the phenotype would be roan, which means the same as patches of red color and patches of white fur color. The second example, when a red flowering plant is crossed with a yellow flowering plant, the F1 produced orange flowers. Show the genotypic and phenotypic ratios if the F1 were crossed with each other. Question 2.1, name the type of dominance. So you look at the phenotype of the offspring to determine the type of dominance this is. The orange flowers of the F1 shows us that this is an intermediate phenotype of red flowers and yellow flowers. Therefore, this is incomplete dominance because no one allele is dominant over the other. The next part says show the genotypic and phenotypic ratios if the F1 were crossed with each other. So this is the second cross, showing what would happen if the F1 offspring were to be crossed with each other. So P2, we're using the same key, capital R for red flowers and capital Y for yellow flowers. P2 phenotype, orange flower times orange flower, since the F1 offspring were crossed with each other. And the genotype, since this is the intermediate or third phenotype, then it would always be a hybrid, so a combination of these two alleles, capital R, capital Y, and times capital R, capital Y. Meiosis, this allele goes into this gamete for this parent, this allele Y goes into that gamete for this parent, so two different gametes. And for the second parent, this allele goes into that gamete and the Y goes into the other gamete, two different types of gametes. Using a Punnett square, so these gametes of this parent would be represented here and these gametes of this parent represented here. R plus R gives you two capital R's here. Capital Y times capital R gives you RY there, and capital R and capital Y gives you RY, and capital Y and capital Y gives you two capital Y's. So the F2 genotypic ratio is 1 homozygous, 2 heterozygous, and 1 homozygous. The phenotypic ratio is 1 red flower color is to 2 orange flower color is to 1 yellow flower color. Thank you.